there was just a deep belief that these teens could learn and that they could gain competence and they could accomplish
Mhm.
what it was that was there for them to accomplish.
The way we encapsulated this, we sort of actually had this core belief. We believe in the potential of the human spirit and the capacity for everyone to thrive. So when they show up, they're often depleted at wit's end. They have maybe self doubt. And so we just committed to believing everybody has the capacity to thrive. And again, it's communicating a message to them that they're inherently good and that they
Mhm.
have capacity.
Danny, thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast. I really can't think of a person that's more ready, I think, and with your background, your passion, the things you're interested in, to be able to answer the questions we have today. And keeping in mind we've got an audience of treatment program professionals will be watching, as well as parents who maybe have a child in a treatment program or have in the past. And so I think it's we're really hoping that the things we're talking today about safety and how safety comes first in these treatment settings, but then the question of what comes next and how great programs shift from the supervision and kind of containment to self leadership. By the end of treatment, we've both witnessed situations where the parents drop off their child, and then a few months later or a few weeks later, they pick them up or they see them again for a period of time, and it's like their child is back, and it's like this miraculous event in their mind. Like, how did that happen? And there's a whole series of things that's going on, right? But let's begin kind of at the beginning, if we can, and talk about the fact that in a wilderness situation, a wilderness treatment program, especially, um, there are some risks to that, and so safety is the non-negotiable piece of that, the starting point. And so, what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis to ensure that the kids are safe before anything else? Even, in some cases, they may have had suicidal thoughts. They may have thought about life wasn't worth living. There may have been some self-harm. And so there's real risk to this. And parents are scared when they're doing this because of the fear they've already, encountered in dealing with that risk. So how do you manage that in a program?
Yeah, Tim, great to be on with you and great question. And yes, safety is paramount, right, for programs and for parents. And so just knowing that that's priority one in every facet of what we're doing, even starting at the beginning. So part of that is that admission screening process, the assessment process, and making sure that those maladaptive behaviors that that child's engaged in at home are things that are within our wheelhouse. So just doing a screening process to make sure, hey, if someone's going to come in the door, we're equipped. We're both clinically trained. We have the sophistication to manage that, but we also have the staffing capabilities and the safety mechanisms to do that. So just knowing that it's priority one in our approach, we know it is the foundation also for therapeutic change. Our clients themselves, not just their parents, are also anxious about safety and their health and well-being.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple parts to that. And one is like from the outset, really trying to build a relationship. And I think this is actually a big part of the safety equation, wilderness programs or any good programs, is
Hmm.
like really from the outset communicating to these young people that we actually care about their basic needs. We're interested in helping them adapt and adjust to this foreign environment that can feel overwhelming. And so that for
Hmm.
them to learn how to sleep well at night, to stay warm when it's cold, to have a tasty meal, those things then build trust in us so we can leverage that.
Yeah. I want to back up one little step though, real
Yeah.
quick, Annie, because I think all of us in the treatment field has had the experience in the past of maybe feeling like we've done our due diligence and ask all the right questions to the parents and gathered information about the child and brought them in and realized that there were some things either not shared, not known, and we find out about that because and then now there has to be a decision made, uh, so like you said, from square, just step number one is making sure there's a good fit, and occasionally once they get there, there's not, right?
True.
And there has to be an adjustment.
And I would say, part of due diligence, if you can, is talking with other providers. Maybe they've been in a hospital, and so getting some information from them. But it is inevitable because they're an adolescent or young adult, and no one is following every move they make. And so, yes, they often they bring some surprises. Tim, to your point,
Yeah.
and again, it comes back to what is the tolerance that organization has is something that we learn. Oh yeah, okay, that shifts our perspective a little bit, or maybe now we need to do something a little different. But so long as it still fits our criteria in terms of what is in our wheelhouse and what we have the bandwidth for, we're equipped and prepared for that. So we've got to be nimble, but we're
Yeah.
prepared for a lot.
And I'm going to ask you a kind of a question because I got onto your website, this consulting, Gain the Ridge Consulting that you've started, and you work with behavioral health organizations and residential programs or outpatient or day treatment, and especially those who are using the outdoors as a part of their program. Um, so, what do you think are maybe two or three things that are principles around safety that you might consult a treatment program on, that you might need to create a system for, or just a principle that you're kind of looking at around the risk, and kind of balancing that with experiences that create growth.
That's a really good question, and I could probably elaborate for quite some time, Tim, because you're right. I love working with organizations who want to utilize the outdoors purposefully, and risk and safety is a big part of that. So, as I kind of alluded to, risk tolerance. So, knowing what it is that you are able to hold and contain and what you're not able to, and really defining that, and then training everyone around that. How do you assess for that? How are you prepared for that? And so, for instance, in treatment programs that might have, a child who's suicidal, do you have the wherewithal and the means to be able to contain that and provide support for that? So the odds are extraordinarily low because you owe it to them and their family to sort of keep them safe. So helping an organization get clear on what their risk tolerance is a big one. Another one, I think, and this is kind of a nuance around culture. Safety really is a function of a couple things, and it largely the culture in the organization and the systems in place that support the people who are operating. And so I think for an organization to be successful in managing risk, they are constantly supporting learning because things happen, especially in this field, right, Tim? We have an unreliable, unpredictable population. In
Yeah.
the case of a wilderness program, you take them outdoors, stuff happens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You could say an expletive, it happens. Like it's just things are
Yeah.
going to break down. You want your organization and the culture to not hide or shy away from those breakdowns. You actually want them to be able to bring those forward. And so that's where you don't want a culture where you're quick to blame or judge, but instead you are quick to learn. And so that would be
Mm.
the other sort of mantra is whenever there's a breakdown, which is inevitable,
Yeah.
you have sort of two choices. And this is actually, I think, a principle in our lives. It's a principle in parenting. If you go to the blame as opposed to the learn opens people up. It says, hey, what's possible? What was maybe upstream of that we could have prevented or do differently? As opposed to blame, people circle the wagons, they start hiding secrets, and all of a sudden you're not learning and evolving to sort of meet the needs of that client and
Mm.
support the people on the ground level. So those are kind of two
I
things that
love
stand
that
out to
you
me.
went to culture. And I would imagine that they're so interdependent, right? The culture that's created, if it's this learning culture, like you said, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to put in systems. You're gonna,
Yes.
if you
Yes.
don't have that learning culture, you're going to be blindsided an awful lot. That's
Yep.
it's a really good point. Um, so let's take the next step, and these early phases of a child in treatment that may have been suicidal, so a higher risk situation. Um, you got the containment that's happening and watching, and the staff are aware, they're trained, they're dealing with the situation well to begin with. What's different? I'd love to have you think about, a staff that's been well trained, they're prepared, they got the right child in the program, their attitudes, the emotional scenario going on right there, versus maybe just the week before and the parents kind of being alone in this and having this chronic issue that's gone on to the point of needing to make this decision, the emotions they have and the responses they have, maybe versus what's possible in a treatment program. Because on the backside, there's some more learning that maybe parents can have as they have a little peek in, behind the scenes to what does that look like with a child with a lot of support, with the right training, and all of those things.
Yeah, it's a good point, Tim. And I am myself as a parent know that we bring sort of our own stuff to those relationships, and that can cloud things. We're also not professionals with our children, and so there's a nice separation to be like, hey, we are trained professionals, and there's a different kind of attachment with those relationships with the client than there is, with our own child.
Hmm.
And so I think some level of objectivity, helps. And then there is training around how to support someone when they are in distress. And I know as a parent, sometimes I can get tripped up pretty quickly in my child's distress or misbehavior. Whereas as a staff member, I don't know what it is, but there's just more patience. And maybe it's because we're not as attached to the looking a certain way in our community, or for them to meet our needs in a certain way. And so I think that separation helps. In terms of safety in our programs, a lot of systems, a lot of checks and balances, and a lot of consulting. And so this is another thing about parenting. Like, it's really hard to go it alone. And this is where people like you and others out there, when a child is struggling and you're at wit's end, what a family often needs is professional guidance and professional
Hmm.
support. And
Hmm.
so we try to create that in a wilderness program. It's like, hey, if the staff are feeling like, oh, this is outside of sort of what I've been taught or trained to do, all right, I know there's someone I can go to. We always have a clinical on-call person who's got credentials. We might have someone in the field who's a supervisor who's like not, sort of day-to-day stuck in this particular group, who can bring some perspective so you can be resourced. And so those are a couple of things that stand out to me around how to sort of do this safely and do it effectively.
Oh, I love that. And, so many parents feel so isolated and alone, and, uh, and their resources are running low, their energy, their stamina, parental stamina is a big deal. And the thing that hit me as you were talking about sort of a different mindset with the fresh staff that's prepared and they've got lots of support versus the mindset of a parent who's gone
Mm,
through all this
mm,
prior to treatment. uh, there's a whole set of beliefs that in a lot of cases parents aren't even really aware they have those beliefs, and they're actually part of the problem in most cases at this point, because they're so close to the action and so intimately tied to their child that they've if they would step back a little bit, and probably are as they're in treatment, step back and look at what were some of the beliefs I was carrying that caused me to parent in the way I did under crisis or under pressure. And there's a lot of things that can be unpacked there for parents. They might have clamped down, become over controlling in that situation, or exhausted and too hands off. I mean, there's so many ways we can maybe miss the opportunity. But
mhm,
I guess I just say to parents out there who have been through this, there's no blame.
mm,
No blaming of you. That's one of the hardest situations you could be in. And they would, the thought of having staff helping with that, creating the safety, knowing that nothing bad is going to happen, is probably a thought that a great wish all of them had during those
mm,
times. So,
mm,
what the parents are going to have to do over time, they've certainly lost their trust
mm,
that their child can manage life. And there's been enough spiraling that they've witnessed firsthand that there absolutely needed to be a intervention, but they're going to be coming home at some point, rejoining the family in some way, and they're going to have to go through what the staff ultimately does, which is move from this place of containment and hypervigilance in some ways
Mhm.
to a letting go and allowing freedom of movement, freedom
Mhm.
of experience. And so that's kind of what I'd love to get your thoughts on next is,
Yeah.
once the stabilization's happened, how do you know that they're ready for more responsibility, more freedom? What are some of the signals that you might be looking for?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And as we bantered a little back and forth prior to getting on air here, it's a little bit nebulous and organic. Now, in a program, and I think this could probably be the same, in the work you've done through Homeward Bound, and what Trustee allows is like we have some systems, and some of those systems are seeking feedback from other members of the community around this child or student and how they're doing. So seeing them, sometimes it's a peer who's been in the program. And one of the things we often do as we move through the phases of the program where they begin to get more freedom, more responsibilities, we sit down and we have their peers give feedback. And we hear from the ones who've been there for a while, maybe sharing some things we didn't know about as staff. And then we have some staff opportunities. Maybe it's during the shift where we're moving from one group of staff on duty to another, and we work a week or two at a time, or day staff, night staff, or whatever, or week staff and weekend staff, relaying information. So I think there's a lot of communication around how they're doing. There are also kind of milestones, so we actually build in, for instance, early in the program, we have some really simple expectations around, hey, can you eat and drink? And, just ways in which you're expected to just behave where we don't make it super complicated, but we're basically asking that you stay within supervision or sight, and that you're being respectful of others. And so we just start with baby steps. And if they begin to succeed in these baby steps, then we can begin to make things a little bit more challenging and accompany a little bit more freedom with that. So it's a combination of incremental progress, lots of communication within the team, but you also see them beginning to want to step into opportunities too. So it's also
Mhm.
listening and observing.
Mhm.
Some of these kids early on are like hands up, like, or I refuse to move, or I give up, and they have a lot of, self-doubt, lack of esteem. They're presented with a challenge, which might be just as simple as packing up in the morning, and they just literally cannot bring themselves to do it. And then at some point, like, oh, we just come in, empathize, support, give them some tools, support them. And then the next morning, they're looking at their stuff laid out and they're like, oh my gosh, I was so overwhelmed yesterday, but I actually know what to do now. Like, okay, that means they're coachable. And so
Mhm.
there's some relationship here. They're trusting us. They're now applying it like, oh, there's an incremental step they just made. And so we're also observing them and seeing it like, okay, they're now able to take some initiative. So it's an
And you're
incremental
always
process.
looking, to add, just the next positive risk you can, right, to the situation.
Mm-hmm,
Like, okay, they packed up today.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
What else might they be willing to step into? What,
mm-hmm,
and that comes from a belief. And
mm-hmm,
in an earlier conversation you and I had, I really loved what you said. That your staff and the way your culture was that you've created was that there was a just a deep belief that these teens could learn and that they could gain competence and they could accomplish
mm-hmm,
what it was that was there for them to accomplish. And
mm-hmm,
so going back to your culture a little bit and
mm-hmm.
and what kind of beliefs you held and how did you create a culture like that?
That's a great question, Tim. And I think all of us as founders held this in common because we had met at another program. And the sort of the way we encapsulated this in our culture is we sort of actually had this core belief. And that belief was we believe in the potential of the human spirit and the capacity for everyone to thrive. We believe in everyone's capacity to thrive. So that when they show up, they're often depleted. They're at wit's end. They have maybe self doubt. They're broken down. They're depressed. or they're angry or they're traumatized. But we had like another kind of mantra where we would talk about like, look beneath the behavior. And so I know part of what I kind of circling back in terms of what's so critical for parents and so critical for staff is to be educated around some things and to also have some guiding principles that you really commit to. And so we just committed to believing everybody has the capacity to thrive, but we also taught our staff about needs. And we talked about Glasser's needs, and maybe that's something you're familiar with, and that everyone's really, even if that behavior is harmful or hurtful, it's really still trying to meet a need. And so if you also look at it through that lens, which is essentially saying, hey, yes, that behavior has consequences. That behavior might be hurtful or harmful to me or others. But underneath that, there's something pure, which is that they're just like the rest of us. But unfortunately, they've chosen a path that's counterproductive or destructive. And so if we can also say, hey, that's a human need of belonging, or that's a human need for fun, or that's a human need for power and control. And so we're kind of destigmatizing. And again, it's communicating a message to them that they're inherently good and that they have capacity. So yes, they're overwhelmed or they don't want to do something. We often come back to look beneath the behavior, remember they have the capacity to thrive, and they're trying to get needs met. And I try, again, I think these are the kinds of things that when parents have a child in treatment, hopefully they are, as you described, getting some awareness around maybe some core principles or values they have as a family or as a parent. They're also getting tools for their tool set. So when that child does come home, they have more capacity. So those are some things that sort of stood out to me about some of the conversations we've had and where the
Yeah.
analogies are between our staff and what they do and parents and what they need to do to welcome their child back home.
They just seem so healthy, what you're talking about, a core belief, a deep belief that they have the capacity to thrive. I want everybody to kind of think about that, because out of that belief, there's going to be very different interactions. If a staff has that belief in a team, they're not stuck with them in the emotional place they're in. They see them, they understand where they're at, but they believe they can get out of there. And I've had some experiences with that. Really, some of the best experiences I ever had was believing that so strongly that I wasn't okay with being stuck, or someone being stuck around me, long and too long. Like I was had a scout troop once, and there was this boy who really struggled in a lot of ways. He was, seemingly kind of behind the other boys in a lot of ways. We were doing this canoeing merit badge, and so we got all the boys out on the lake, and one of the things they had to do is they had to capsize the canoe and then turn it back over and then get into the canoe.
All right. Quite the challenge.
And yeah, a huge challenge, and we spent most of the day in the lake getting everybody through it. But we got to this boy, and I knew him well enough, and this is where some of the knowledge, it's not just hope, it's not just this, belief without some knowledge. I knew the boy, and and it was his turn, and he just didn't believe it himself. So me and a few of the other boys are sitting in a canoe next to him. He capsizes his canoe. The first couple times he's learning, he's getting the competency, right? He's developing some technique. He's getting some coaching from everybody in the other boat, and but then he starts to fatigue, and he wasn't real strong. And it was like one of these feelings, like do not want him to fail this, because I know he can do it, but he doesn't know it yet. And it was one of the most special moments with that troop, honestly, where everybody was kind of now in this mode of encouraging him along. He had the technique, he knew what it was, he's losing the strength. And it was just this energy of this belief in him that he ultimately was able to swing that leg up and get into the canoe without capsizing it. And wow, what a celebration that was.
You had that belief in him, right?
Yes.
And I think this is the case for parents. It's the case for us as professionals, and they will test that. right?
Hmm.
And I think what I'm hearing too, and this is part of what we apply, and I think good programs apply, is how do we build incremental progress? How do we teach them? How do we step in and walk beside them? And how do we build little victories that start to add up? And we had a concept called programmed unavoidable success.
Oh, nice.
You maybe have heard that, but it's the idea that, like, all right, we've got to find a way to get them to experience success because there's something about the momentum of that. And so, and
Yes.
part of it is belief in them, encouragement, but it's also like skill,
Yeah.
like being a good coach or a teacher, and being able to, like, bow drill fires is a common thing used in wilderness therapy, right? And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, raw materials are wood, and you've got to create a friction fire, and it's hard. And there's a physical component, there's a mental component, there's an intellectual component to it.
Yeah.
And you can put all the effort in the world into it and still not get a fire. And so there's a lot of little nuances. And so, how do you, and it might be, for instance, I make the fire, show them that, hey, this is how you do it. And then I hand them my kit, my materials that I know are tried and true.
Mm.
Maybe, for instance, and like, okay, this isn't a raw set that they're having to build from scratch, which will be a goal, right? We're going to
Yeah.
create the incremental challenge as they go once they build competency. And I think that that's can be applied in so many ways, whether it's in leadership and working with others. It's even applying to ourselves as we want to grow and change. It's like, all right, what's that next step? That's a baby step, but it's progress forward.
Hmm.
Um, and
Oh,
then
I
there's
love
something that
that.
happens in our, I think there's like, oh, yeah. And that's where I think you see these kids, the light comes back on because it's like they've experienced a lot of failure, not going to school, relationships falling apart, not feeling good about their bodies, not feeling smart, right? And all of a sudden, like, you start chipping away at their own negative self beliefs where they can begin to experience things that are different and then recognize, like, oh, whenever we're in that space, we're more apt to achieve, accomplish,
Hmm.
um, you know, overcome obstacles.
Yeah. I'm just what a great principle. This small steps, kind of a program. What'd you call it? To
Programmed unavoidable success.
love it. I love it. I think that is
Mhm.
something that all of us can really, just get excited about the thought of, hey, how do you set this up? How do you set the conditions, the
Mhm.
training? Now, obviously, it takes some want on the part of the teen, right?
Mhm.
Um, if and that I think is where they get to a certain point why they end up in treatment is because no one can quite find out how to start the ignition or
Mhm.
the want needed
Mhm.
for them to
Mhm.
take those steps. And
Mhm.
and so that's why these programs exist,
Mhm.
to kind of take these steps and keep them safe and then get them moving. Movement is
Mhm.
sometimes the most fundamental
Mhm.
beginning point, right?
Mhm.
Like, get up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know and that's the beginning, and that's something maybe the parents weren't able to help their child do at that
Mhm.
point. So
Mhm.
and then now let's kind of get into the experience of the parent who had years of effort with their child, and ultimately what I find at the end before they send their child to treatment, they are exhausted. I mean, they're really kind of at a point of they're burned out, and their belief is not there anymore, and so they're almost in need of the same thing just at home that you're talking about. It's like they're stuck.
Mhm.
They can't think outside of these ruts they've been in as well. They've probably, in some cases, uh, developed patterns interpersonally with their co-parent
Mhm.
that kind of keeps them in those ruts.
Mhm.
We do our best, and if we're co-parenting with someone that's very different from us, or they're trying to balance our weakness with maybe the other side of the teeter totter, and
Mhm.
they move out, and we have to move out, and so forth, and eventually we are stuck into these modes that need to be unwound a little bit in order to create this belief that there can be a situation set up for unavoidable success.
Mhm.
and it has to start with the parent. Parents, since college, my passion has been to help families thrive. For decades after, my team and I delivered the premier in-home aftercare, but it could be costly, and too many families were left without support. That's why we created Trusty, a unique blend of proven curriculum, personalized coaching, and intuitive technology. Starting at just $129 a month, you can access tools and expertise to get and keep your family on track at a fraction of what we used to have to charge. Like we always say, help things go right before they can go wrong. Visit trusty.com, spelled with 2 Y's, to learn more and subscribe today. Many years ago at this point, it seemed to me that, there wasn't a lot of parent work going on. There was some lip service to it many years ago, but over the years, I think the programs got a lot better at this because they recognized that there can be a lot of progress with the teen in a treatment program. But if that parent is still stuck in that same place, the same patterns with their co-parent, and all the environmental factors are kind of still in place, then it's an easy slide back down, a quick one.
Yeah.
So that's, I really am happy to see that so many programs have realized that. I was talking to Tony Mosier in a previous podcast, and they've got a short-term treatment program as well as a long-term one, and it's very frustrating not having more time. But what he said was, we've realized where's our greatest leverage, and he said a session with the parents may be worth 3 with or 4 with the teenager.
I love, and I'll interject a little bit. So I worked a lot on the admissions and wilderness program, and a lot of parents, rightly so, would ask, like, what makes a difference? Like what is it maybe about your program, or what's the difference between a successful outcome and an unsuccessful one? And this is not just, I mean, at the time I sort of was saying this anecdotally because it's what everybody was saying, but now there's real evidence. And obviously I'm talking to someone who's got a PhD in marriage and family therapy. It is proven that the work the parents do is one of the biggest predictors of that child's success in treatment. In fact, NATSAP, you might be aware, they produced some research recently. They looked at a lot of programs, both behavioral health, I should say residential, as well as wilderness programs. And really what they saw, and it was a really simple instrument. They were comparing outcomes on the YOQ, which is a really, detailed instrument that says, hey, this child's healthy or not, essentially. And they asked the therapist who was involved in supporting this child and their family, the level of engagement, meaning not that they were perfect, but what degree were they participating in the opportunities the program provided. Essentially, when they got a very good rating, essentially, that was essentially seen in strong correlation with the child's outcome. And so I used to answer that question by saying, you think it's about what we're doing or what your child's doing. It's actually what you do, which is kind of, I think for a lot of them, kind of mind-blowing. And I didn't mean that in a way that was confrontational. I meant that way in an empowering way. Because in every relationship, the only person we have control over is ourselves. And that's the same thing as a parent. And so all right, what can we do? And I know you've alluded to this, maybe what beliefs are in the way, or what of our own stuff, maybe our traumas or how we were parented, what attitude. So the more work that they do kind of alongside their child and sort of build awareness, education, tools, that will have a direct impact on their child and that relationship and the whole family. And as you also know, that relationship with our co-parent is critical too. That's a really big factor. But I was sort of blown away when I started seeing the research. I'm like, how that's proven. It's pretty remarkable and empowering.
What's interesting is that kind of research knowledge has been around a long, long time.
I'm sure it has, and you probably read about it in grad school.
Yeah, when I started Homeward Bound way back when, the whole goal was I'd seen this miraculous change in wilderness, and then, I don't know, maybe half or a third of our kids would go home after wilderness, and the other 2/3 would go on, and so we were able to kind of watch them go home, and at first they're still got the wilderness high for a while, and they want to sleep on the floor, and they want to sleep in the backyard, and all of that, and then fairly quickly we started to see, really big challenges to their momentum
Mm,
come up. And that's what triggered the whole Homeward Bound thing. So what I decided to do is say, my whole goal was these treatment programs I know work. I see it from beginning to end, the changes, and even the parents would say, they didn't see all those little incremental baby steps, and they just see this huge
mm,
leap as
yeah.
almost miraculous in their mind, like this is a total miracle, right? And then it would come undone afterwards, and so I just started looking at all the research, and that's what it came down to. It was, the climate of the home, the
Mm,
emotional climate of the home, the structure of the home,
mm,
the parental alignment,
mhm,
clarity of expectations, things like
mm,
that. And
mhm,
that's been known for a long, long
mhm,
time.
mhm,
But I think there's just a lot more awareness across the board, and so, I think what I'm seeing from parents though still is really a desire to have those baby steps outlined for them, you
mhm.
know, put them on a path that leads to unavoidable success. And that's going to stay in my mind and ring in my mind now, Danny, because I had not heard of that, and
Mhm,
it's a great phrase.
mhm,
Um, I think sometimes, and maybe others out there are the same way. Sometimes I think if I know it, everybody else must know it,
mm,
and so I'll skip,
yeah.
I'll jump instead
Mhm,
of
mhm,
teaching the middle step. I might jump to the
mhm,
2 or 3 steps ahead, and so it's making me realize I really need to just assume they don't.
mhm,
They don't know what that middle step is or that
mhm,
little teeny,
mhm,
success in between
mhm,
could be.
mhm, mhm.
Um, so honestly, I'm kind of thinking introspectively here at my
Yeah.
patterns
Mm,
sometimes to
mm,
kind of assume this is just common knowledge and everybody
mm.
should be able to do it, and
Mhm.
not recognize the fact that, yeah, I've been studying this for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so
So
familiar to you,
yes,
and probably part of what you've integrated in your life. And but you've committed yourself to a very important role for families, because the true test. We used to say this in our program. It's not this program. It's what happens when you get back to the quote real world. It's the
yeah,
temptations, it's the obstacles, it's the setbacks that happen at home. And
hmm,
hopefully the successes they've had, the tools, the shift maybe in some of their own beliefs, that they're still present, but they still need someone to support them in those circumstances.
hmm,
And I think a good plan after treatment needs to include support for those families. There has to be resources because if you think about it, it is such a dramatic change from what it was before. Like it was crisis, right? And maybe trauma, and I mean it was a lot. Then they go through this transformation. The whole family, if they're engaged, the child's engaged, they really went through a significant shift. But there's a lot of containment, there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of support, a lot of supervision. There's a lot of chance for sort of unavoidable success. There's going to be some breakdowns, and even when they get home, and I think normalizing that with our families too, like, hey, it's okay that things may not be perfect, but that they also know, like, hey, I have tools that I've gained from I've been along this journey and growing as a parent. We've been growing as a couple, but then having someone that they can go to. I mean, if you think about it, and I know I can speak for my own case, Tim, but like if I was struggling as a professional or struggling in my relationship, at some point I'm at wit's end and I got to ask for help. And when I look back on milestones when I made significant progress, it's because someone was there who was able to give me some perspective and a resource so I could then grow and expand to learn to then step up to this new occasion.
hmm,
And then that in turn made me a better parent, maybe a better partner, maybe a better business leader. And so I think we owe it to families. And I think families owe it to themselves to be gentle themselves, but also to stay connected with professionals to guide them, because there's going to be some turbulence, and having someone there as a resource is going to make that less
Hmm.
volatile, more manageable, so they can come out of it with more competence, that relationship intact, and then help that child continue on that journey of individuation and maturity, and making more and more healthy choices.
You reminded me of a conversation I had with a dad a while back, and he was one of these that engaged in a lot of work during the treatment time. His child was away, him and his wife both, and so I complimented him on all of that, and he saw there was a lot of growth they'd made, and he really understood all the principles that would come into play, and his competence, in other words, had really increased during that time. Uh, so I said to him, I said, "So why do you think you might need our help?" Because he was so confident in all that he had learned.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I know myself." And he says, "I know that in that moment of truth, when I see some backsliding, when I see some things from the past that scares me, uh, he knew enough to know
Mm-hmm.
that that moment of truth is where he needed support.
Mm-hmm.
He needed that to help him through that until he could have a track record of success himself."
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, what a great awareness this father had,
Mm-hmm.
both in taking advantage of the time, learning what he learned during that time, practicing in ways whatever way he could, but it was still dress rehearsal. It
Yeah.
wasn't the
Yeah.
real show.
Yeah.
And he was aware that when the lights are on, so to speak, and it's the real show. I did ballroom dancing, by the way, at BYU. So we'd have this big tour
Uh-huh.
every summer for several weeks that we
Mm-hmm.
go out on a tour, and our director was adamant that we do dress rehearsal, that we do it a couple times, and that
Mm-hmm.
means we got
Mm-hmm.
to have our all of our costumes ready and on. We've got to have the routine down. We have the music, the lights, simulate as best we can.
Mm-hmm.
But even after that, that's something different when you get on the road in a different stage, and now you got an audience and there's pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But thank heavens you did the dress rehearsal. So yeah, I think I kind of want to kind of end with that because we brought the child in our conversation from
Mm-hmm.
maybe a hospital
Mm-hmm.
to the program and kind of the mindset of the program. You've done a great job
Mm-hmm.
of helping us kind of get into the mindset of systems and culture and belief in the child's ability to succeed, and how that leads to ever more adventure, really, for the teen, and
Mm-hmm.
more opportunity for them to try out their new skills or step up in hard times. And you see that, day in and day out over the course of time. And at the same time, you got the parents, and there's a lot more work going on with them. And now we bring them full course, full circle back home again. Now, the parents will inevitably, you said, encounter triggers that will happen, and it will contribute. That their old beliefs have been challenged because in many cases they had these really rigid and deep-seated beliefs that their child had this diagnosis, therefore this limitation, therefore you know we've got to worry, and therefore I've got to handle it this way. That's been interrupted because they inevitably will see things in that
Mm-hmm.
process that's like, oh, I didn't really expect that. I didn't think she could do that,
Mm-hmm.
and but now they're coming full circle home. They see a little bit of the same attitude. Maybe the first day that the child wakes up and doesn't want to go to school, and it triggers the old memories, the old trauma,
Mm-hmm.
the conflict. They've got these theoretical skills in their toolbox now. Um, what would you say to those parents right now in that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something certainly we encounter when we do what we do, right, Tim? And I think something that I always recommend is take a deep breath, remember what they've learned, remind them what their child has learned. So just sort of reframing a little bit to say, hey, this is, yes, it might look similar, and that's going to evoke some of these strong feelings that maybe kind of get you to a place of overwhelm. So how can we help you kind of bring that nervous system down, remind yourself of what they've accomplished and what you've accomplished, and then start to discuss a plan or a strategy. And they probably have some new ways of doing things, but they're uncertain or fearful, and they might just need a little bit of dress rehearsal, right? They need maybe someone that they can bounce this idea off. Maybe it's the spouse. Maybe they have a relationship now and they kind of know, like, oh yeah, we used to do it this way. How can we be more intentional, more purposeful? And so often part of, as you know, one of the fundamental skills that we teach is validation, which is, can you just kind of validate what that child's experiencing? Like, and so just like that sometimes just disarms the situation. It can reduce kind of the intensity of it, just to be like, and for a parent to do that, like, oh, I see that you're stuck and maybe not sure what to do, or like sort of inviting in a
Yeah.
way that's so different. It's not a judgment or I've got to fix this or, you're wrong. It's like, oh, and that deep listening and that validation, maybe that's going to dissolve some of that tension and sort of invite an exchange, as an example.
Oh, I
So,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah, what a powerful, you know, principle that you're
Mhm.
tapping into there. Um, it makes me think about, as we started to recognize there were phases to the transition, that there's this sort of excitement slash anxiety phase before they come home. Excitement for the teen, more often anxiety for the parent.
Yeah.
But when they come home, there tends to be a honeymoon, a short
Hmm.
one,
Hmm.
but there tends to be a honeymoon. And then there's what we call the testing phase. And it's not just abrupt usually, it just sort of bleeds into that. And one of the things we started to tell people is, it's almost like, who was it on Seinfeld that said this? Like, I've been expecting you, right? When and that phrase, if they know that that happens every single time,
Hmm.
and here it is, what I'd like them to think of is, okay, this is my cue
Hmm.
to now do the things that I've learned. So don't believe my emotions right now. That's not going to take me where I need to go.
Hmm.
Go back to uh, really the beliefs that you've started to develop, that created more space for your teen to be different this time than they
Hmm.
were before,
Hmm.
and do some of the things you talked about. Take a deep breath, uh, get curious
Hmm.
instead of afraid,
Hmm.
and from that can come a very different outcome. But it's
Hmm.
like, if you recognize the moment
Hmm.
and say, here's my moment to actually apply all the things I've learned, to not let the old baggage, the fear,
Hmm.
all of that come back in right now. Here's my moment.
Hmm.
And that's why we say this transitional process is a family systems transition.
Hmm.
And these phases affect all involved, and especially the teen and the parents.
Yeah.
But this is their moment. And so they get a
Hmm.
chance to actually apply and redefine themselves
Hmm.
as a parent. It's,
Yeah.
in my mind,
Hmm.
most parents would never want to have to go through what they've gone through, or their child to go through what they've gone through. But the benefit that maybe a family that doesn't have to go through that
Hmm.
doesn't have
Hmm.
is a chance to redefine the future. It's like there's been this break in the action,
Hmm.
lots of work,
Hmm.
and now a reset
Hmm.
and an opportunity to apply true principles that they could never before. So they actually have the opportunity to create a culture now, to go
Hmm.
back to what you pointed to in organizations, a very different culture
Hmm.
than they had before. And it's a
Yeah.
really exciting moment if they
Yeah.
recognize that.
Yeah. There's a couple things I just want to emphasize. One is, we're always going to be better prepared if we've had a chance to get some perspective on what's likely to come. So the fact that you all have, like, hey, we've seen this with hundreds, thousands of families,
Yeah.
and that there's going to be kind of this process.
Hmm.
And the fact that then your education increases your awareness. So you see something, you're like, oh, this is normal.
Yeah.
Okay, that just brings the anxiety down a notch. Like, and that's, I
Yeah.
think, a lot of what we're trying to help, whether it's the staff in an organization or it's parents, is like, just as I think you said, like, you don't have to believe that feeling. You don't have to buy that. You can just, and like, oh, okay, I can notice it. I can bring my nervous system down. I can resource. And it's like, oh, this is actually part of it. And so
Yeah.
just that in and of itself, I think, is really profound to support them in that. I really like that point that you made, Tim.
I think one of the favorite pages in Not by Chance, I should know it by heart. I don't, but is the page with the graph on it. And it's literally it labels the phases. It's got the excitement phase with the up and down up here, but kind of a high level at the end of treatment. It's got a nice, smooth, high level arc right there with the honeymoon phase. But if you look down there at the fine print,
Mm-hmm.
it has approximate time in each phase.
Hmm.
And it says 1 day to, you know, to 3 or 4 weeks. It's
Mm-hmm.
there. It
Mm-hmm.
could happen. That could be a very
Mm-hmm.
quick honeymoon phase, but
Yeah, yeah.
not. But they'll look at that and say, okay, everybody comes off the honeymoon phase.
Mm-hmm.
And if they think, and that means that things are going to get harder, it's going to get more confusing, more triggering.
Mm-hmm.
And if they just say, oh, we're right there, we're
Mm-hmm.
actually on that graph, just like everybody else is,
Mm-hmm.
and we're experiencing that next phase, which is our
Mm-hmm.
opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to now apply the things that we've learned. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
well, this has been so great, Danny, to have you here. I just highly recommend you to those out there looking to bring someone in who has both the big picture and also the details
Mm-hmm.
of how to affect culture, how to create, a culture that would put in place systems to manage risk, but also to get as much growth going because of the culture that's been created. And you understand also very intimately the parent journey and what they need along the way too. So I'm just so impressed. It's been fun to get to know you better over the last
Mm-hmm.
few weeks as we've had an opportunity to speak at the conference and since then. And I'm just kicking myself. It's like, why didn't I get to know Danny like this
Yeah.
earlier?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm really excited for the good you're going to be doing in this
Mm-hmm.
field and continue to do. And
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to be broader now. You're going to be able to affect lots of organizations. And just wish you all the
Thank
best
you.
in going forward.
Tim, thank you. It's been a pleasure, as it always is. Every time, even going back to maybe like 2008, when I think we actually first met
Yeah,
at a NatSep event, I've always had a fondness in our exchanges. Same with your wife, too. But I appreciate that so much, Tim. And just to shout back at you, what you've done, the impact you've had on families, and I know some of those are the families that our program, entrusted, and to be in relationship with you and to be in partnership with those out there whose mission is really to help families and young people thrive. It's hard work what we do, and so it's nice to have people like you to sort of commiserate with and learn from and collaborate with. And the work you're doing with Trusty, the work you've done at Homeward Bound, and the book Not by Chance, you've created quite a legacy. And keep up the good work. I look forward to seeing what unfolds for you as well.
I sure appreciate that, Danny. Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
talk soon.